and fires on the bear, and then the bear still has like enough energy that he just fucking really you could feel the bear's aggression too.
Yeah.
That he gets or she gets angry. But he had wandered into a nest, I think, because the cubs were. She was just protecting her own. Yeah, it's an effective scene. I don't know why, but it didn't even register to me that it was CGI. I was like, how the fuck did they do this? Yeah.
You know, Wesley, this is as bad as like Game of Thrones in the wig.
I'm not sure if this is true, but I think they did some kind of, I don't know if it was just referencing, but there was some kind of animatronics with the bear too.
There was two guys.
Yeah?
It was two guys that were basically like kind of having that like, you know, tumble with him and everything in order to, you know, kind of create this large body that was attacking him and everything. And then they did like a lot of studying as far as the noises and how exactly that would play out. They watched a lot of like videos.
I know they saw
of bear attacks.
Yeah, they watched one that was like I don't know which zoo it was, but some drunk man wandered into like a how do you say, like into one of the bear pens and was viciously attacked, and they watched that to see how they would react with a human person.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I would never watch that.
Another question before we talk about the real story of Hugh Glass. Do you know what, without looking it up, do you know what the definition of revenant actually is? No. What it actually means?
No.
It means one that returns after death or a long absence.
Makes sense.
I also know that because of the Distiller song that came out years ago.
You would like reference that. It's so typical. I mean, obviously, you know, kind of like my background, that I will nitpick specific things off of movies based on either the costume or whether it was authentic to what they were trying to portray and everything. So I think that just like the big standout of this movie for me was how they had a consultant, a cultural consultant, like on set at all times to really teach them the language,
the dialect, the different dialects, right?
Mm-hmm. So that way, between Tom Hardy and Leo DiCaprio, they would both be able to actually speak it correctly, but also just the painting on the horses and everything, how that had to match the warrior and everything. Just the authenticity and just making sure that they represent the indigenous people correctly was really, really, I don't know, just powerful to me, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Because they did their justice to them, I think, in the movie. I know that they were criticized for some things, and, you know, they might have seen it as an exploitation of these indigenous people, but I do think that there was that representation there, which is really important.
Yeah. I know they got attacked for the Canadians or the French portrayals of the French men in the film as well, because they said that they were portrayed as rapists and looters and whatnot, and it's like I mean when you look at it like that, it's like that's not necessarily saying that all French people are that. That's just that group of people were unsavory characters, and you have to think about the time period is the New World, like crazy shit happen every day. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I thought it means a lot that they went the extra mile to make sure everything was as it should be, authentic, you know, in every aspect. I'll go through a little, like a sum of what Hugh Glass actually went through. So, Glass was born in Pennsylvania in 1783 and quickly became accustomed to being out at sea. One day his ship was boarded by French pirates who gave him two choices, either die or join them, and join them he did naturally. Fast forwarding a couple years, Glass was able to escape his ship and swim to shore with another man. He just so happened to be in Texas, where the Akirakawa Native Americans patrolled regularly. As the two traveled to Kansas, they managed to evade any rough encounters until they come across a few Pawnee who also weren't fans of European dudes. As they strung up Glass's friend, torturing him with pine needles before setting him on fire, Glass almost met the same fate, but with some quick thinking, he offered up some goods he had on him as a way to barter for his own life. And believe it or not, it totally worked. The Pawnee were so impressed they took in Glass as one of their own, allowing him to live amongst them, where he eventually met his wife, even though I've also read that there is no concrete evidence that there was a real woman.
A real Pawnee woman.
Is briefly mentioned in the film. After a few years living with the Pawnee Native Americans, Glass eventually made his way to St. Louis, where he became an active trapper, becoming familiar with the land and joining up with a group of mountain men who were deeply rooted in the fur and pelt trades. During an expedition within the river of Missouri, a trade agreement with the Native Americans turned sour and caused casualties on both sides. Glass survived the ordeal, once again making his way to Yellowstone with a few men remaining. However, Glass would end up with even more bad luck after he accidentally stumbled upon an active bear's nest, where he was basically torn to shreds like in the film, except they point out that this bear tore chunks of his flesh and tossed it to the cubs. And then the cubs come over and start joining in, so you have 3 bears attacking this one guy, and he didn't, like in the film, I think he kills the bear. But in the actual what went down in reality, the men that he was with come and they're able to either they scare the bears away or they kill them. So this is where the film falls in line with the real story somewhat, with the remaining men creating a stretcher and helping carry Glass as long as they could. Eventually they give up, thinking that Hugh would pass away from his wounds. So the general sets up a deal for 2 men, Fitzgerald and Bridger for real, to stay behind to see Glass would have a proper burial. But after 5 days, Glass was still alive. With Ree still on their tails, both Bridger and Fitzgerald left Glass for dead. But what they didn't count on was Glass's will to live. Although his body was completely broken down, I think they point out that he had actual maggots growing on his back from his wounds. He let them
eat the dead infected flesh.
He took a few days to compose himself before basically crawling his way back to Yellowstone, insistent on finding the men who left him. It took Glass 6 months to finally catch up with his original company in Fort Henry. Finding only the young Bridger, Glass realized Fitzgerald was to blame for everything he had endured for the last several months. I think it was 6 months, specifically. As word came that Fitzgerald was now at Fort Atkinson, Glass jumped on a boat only to be overtaken once again by the Ree. Barely escaping with his life, he set out on a 400-mile trek to Fort Atkinson, and he totally made it. But by this time, Fitzgerald had officially joined the army, which made him untouchable to Hugh Glass. And that's literally where the story ends. Which is funny because they totally reference that in the movie, but they're able to catch him beforehand. And I mean, again, like we're saying, cinematically, that would have pissed so many people off if he got to him.
I never thought about that.
And he was like, "Oh yeah,
all's forgiven."
Yeah, I mean.
No, yeah, that makes sense.
I love when people say, "Oh, this is a slow movie," when it literally busts out in action in the first 5 minutes. Not even 5 minutes.
But not just that, even just kind of like those hallucinations that he's having of his wife,
mm-hmm.
and then later on of his son,
mm-hmm.
I think are really powerful too.
that's really weird thinking that I know Christian Bale was attached to this.
Really?
Before. Yeah, in between it was Park Chan-wook with Samuel L. Jackson, and then it was somebody else who, his name escapes my mind, but then, yeah, it was Christian Bale would have been Glass, I think. Which I think...
He would have done good.
Yeah. I could see him doing this. But it's funny, Samuel L. Jackson, he's like, it's motherfucking cold out here. Or something.
Stupid.
The horse carcass is nuts.
It is, but it's also very moving if you really think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, it was, fucking tragic and shit, the way that they fall off the cliff. But after he guts the horse for warmth, basically, when he gets out, gets dressed, he kind of touches the horse. Which just kind of ties in this whole, like, I don't know, because I don't think that it was just, man's connection to Earth or man's connection to, indigenous people. But I think also just, that connection between him and the animals. Because there was almost like this respect that he had kind of paid the horse. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
He had more than done its job for him. And there was like that little bit of appreciation, which I thought was also really cool. That was deep, yo. Did you have a favorite part?
A favorite part? I feel like there's a lot in this. I really like the effectiveness of of the opening scene.
Yeah.
Where they're setting you up and everybody's, how do you say, they're like trying to get their pelts ready and loading the boats and everything, and then they just get ambushed. But then you're not knowing what to expect because this movie has just barely started, and then you just have this chaos that's happening, and it's like I think it is it's trick edited to look like one shot, but it's a continuous shot, where there's no, you're just going around and you're seeing everything in what looks like and feels like real time. So, yeah. I remember seeing that for that scene for the first time. I was like, this is incredible.
Right off the bat.
What about you?
It was that the catching the snowflakes with their tongues. Mm-hmm. But also that, like, hallucination that he has where his wife is almost like floating above him. And he's just like opening his eyes and closing them. And she's just floating. I think that the way, like the imagery of her consistently throughout the whole movie was really effective.
Because that he has a strong bond with her because of his son, Hawk, and they even end the movie like with her pretty much, where she's walking off, and that's like the last thing that he sees, and then he looks at us and breaks the fourth wall almost.
Yeah, and even like the whispering throughout the entire movie. I think is really great.
Yeah, and then he opens the film with his narration, right?
But what I did think it was interesting, though, is that in that one scene where Fitzgerald grabs his gun and he says, I'm on the right end of the gun or whatever.
Yeah.
Hawk is only talking in his language. But then later on, when it comes to Fitzgerald, when he's about to stab him, he actually speaks English. So I feel like the whole time I was under the impression that he didn't speak English until the moment that he did. So that I was like, wait a second, what just happened?
That's interesting. I didn't think about that. Yeah, he switches. To me, I just thought, they're speaking in their native language, so that way the others won't know. Because he's like, you have to listen to me. And he tells them, like, they're not going to listen to what you have to say. They only care about the color of your face, right? Which is another theme. I feel like it touches on, like, I don't know if it if you would say that it's like